Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw The Hunger Games open to an abysmal $99 million worldwide, getting only $44 million domestic. That's the bottom end of the range for this film. Funny enough, with the actor strike over and this film having at least a week's worth of actors promotion, it still wasn't enough to do anything. This is talking, we're talking here about conclusive evidence that when it comes to the actors promoting their movies, it does not move the actual needle. If it did, we would have at the very least seen the needle move just even a little bit, right? Talking maybe an extra million or two. Nope, this film actually ended up doing bottom of the barrel, bottom of what was expected. Some would probably say to argue that possibly it even lost some money with the promotions. I doubt that that's the actual case. I think that's going a little bit too far, but still the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is showing us very clearly that, yeah, actors really don't sell their movies anymore. It's all about word of mouth, and it's all about do people actually even care to spend that much money to go see these movies anymore. And turns out when it comes to a film like The Hunger Games, a prequel, Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes, no one's really showing a lot of interest in that film worldwide. And The Marvels is suffering, as you can see, Tony at Deadline even has to admit this, the worst second weekend drop-off after the worst opening weekend. So The Marvels is actually setting all kinds of records, just not the records that Disney or any of the people in the media want to actually fully admit to. So we'll talk about that and plenty of other things. Before we get further, please make sure you smash that like button. A lot of that 5-minute Austin, smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Tony at Deadline indeed is talking about how it's chirping to $44 million. I do like how when it comes to Tony and Nance over at Deadline covering the domestic and international numbers respectively, that when they come to their titles, they love to throw in a bunch of the jokes. They like to throw in all kinds of wordplay, right? The puns and everything. But it's funny because you can tell that for some movies they're clearly playing some kind of coverage for, whereas for others, they're a little bit more open when a film is not doing as well. So saying it's chirping to $44 million, I think is probably a little bit more accurate because it's not really all that big. However, Nancy, good old Nance over at Deadline, really takes the cake because she says that it's devouring a $99 million global, while at the same time admitting that Trolls Band Together had a larger opening weekend. That's right, more people went to go see Trolls Band Together than the Hunger Games movie. Now, this is not surprising to anyone that's been following this stuff for a long time. However, it is interesting nonetheless that these are the numbers currently as they stand. Can't say that Rachel Zegler had a whole lot of positive impact on people actually having a desire to go see this movie. Obviously, there's a plethora of other factors that have led into it. Some people will only hang on that one thing that I said about Rachel Zegler and say, oh, you just said it was all about her. Like, no, I think that she's a part of it. But there's so many other factors, including the fact that this is a movie based off a book that was written pretty much for the exclusive abilities for them to actually make a movie off of. And also, when you look at the entire franchise of the movies for The Hunger Games, they made less and less money over time, especially when they decided to split the last story into two separate movies. So I can't really say I'm all that surprised by these numbers. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the domestic numbers first. So The Hunger Games, as you can see right here, we've got Hunger Games, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes making $44 million. That's at the bottom end of the range. And so this number could actually go in lower. We'll get the actual sometime on Monday or Tuesday, and so that will obviously play a factor there. But still, the fact that this movie is coming in as low as it is in the comparisons, remember that Box Office Pro had the average range for this film being around $46-47 million, and I think their low end, their updated low end, was only about $45 million. And so the fact that it's coming in below pretty much all estimates, or at the bottom end at the very least of all estimates, I think is quite telling about how even if there is, quote, good word of mouth, it really is essentially non-existent, or at the very least, it does not have that much of an impact for a story most people just do not care about, including people that might actually have been fans or have been fond of the previous Hunger Games movies or of the actual novels themselves. Coming to the number 2 spot is Trolls Band Together at $30.6 million. So again, doing quite well there. Obviously making around $70 million or so roughly internationally. So seemingly doing quite well, though I will say I'm not really a big, I don't have a lot of knowledge when it comes to the Trolls movies overall, so I don't know exactly how this film would stand next to the previous movies in the franchise. What I do know is that those films tend to cost a lot less from Universal than what a Disney animated feature would cost, so it's probably in a pretty good position to do pretty well. The Marvels coming in here at the number 4 spot. Technically, according to this chart, it's interesting how they're listing at the number 4 spot, because right now they're reporting, Disney is, that it made $10.2 million, which would make it only a 78% drop. Thanksgiving from Sony is reporting 10.2. I would not be surprised if Disney is reporting these numbers as 10.2 to try to make it seem like it's not that bad, right? To try to make it seem like the bleeding's not all that bad. But there were some estimates going into the weekend that, as the numbers started coming out for the Friday and Saturday, that the film would probably, if possibly break 10, would maybe only get to $9 million. And so I would not be surprised if when the actuals come out on Monday, that percentage ends up being closer to 80%. Either way, it is atrocious. This is, I think, one of the worst box offices that we've ever seen, not to mention the fact that it costs as much as it did. The one thing Hunger Games has going for it is that it costs a lot less, at least according to the numbers that have been given to us, whereas the Marvels cost way too much money and no one is going to see it. There's a great chance that this movie, right, the Marvels, does not even get to $100 million domestic, and an even stronger chance that it doesn't get to $200 million international. That would make it by far the worst performing MCU film of all time, and we've already heard that because it had the worst opening of all time. And the fact that at $65 million, right now, after 2 weeks of release, a modern day Marvel film, right, is only about $10 million above where the unadjusted numbers for the Incredible Hulk's opening weekend was. Remember, Incredible Hulk opened to $55 million opening weekend. This movie just got to $65 million. As of the first Friday, or second Friday of the Marvel's release, it was not yet even matching that of the Incredible Hulk film unadjusted. So it says a lot about the current state of Marvel, and also about just how, the things that you're doing right now with the MCU are clearly not selling very well at all. Thanksgiving, as I said, is technically in the number 3 spot. It'll be interesting to see when the actuals come in, whether that will be the case or not. I believe Thanksgiving is a horror film from Sony. And then the number 5 spot, we got Five Nights at Freddy's still hanging around after 4 weeks. 61% drop there. So the fact that this film has still, even with very high drops percentage-wise, has still been making multiple millions of dollars, even when also at the same time being available on a streaming service, tells you, hey, guess what? You can actually make quite a bit of money if you actually give fans what they want. Also, here's a fun fact and a fun record that Five Nights at Freddy's will have at the very least, is that it will have undoubtedly a higher box office by the end of its domestic run than the Marvel's film. And Marvel's only at $65 million after 2 weeks, $132 million for Five Nights at Freddy's. This film barely, if it does get to $100 million, would barely get there, and I don't think that it will. So yeah, let's just say Five Nights at Freddy's is going to make more money, not just domestically, but worldwide, than what the Marvels did. Let that sink in for a little bit about the current state. And anytime you hear anyone trying to, shill for the movie and try to explain with, various cope mechanisms about why the Marvels isn't doing nearly as well, just go ahead and remind them saying, okay, then how is it that a Five Nights at Freddy's movies is doing a lot better? Like, come on, let's just be honest with ourselves that there's a lot of mistakes that you've made, Disney executives, and until you actually turn around, which right now there are no signs that you will, you're going to continue to lose money and be in a total embarrassment to Hollywood and just the box office industry as well. Going into the individual releases to look at the worldwide numbers here, we got Hunger Games, Ballad, Songbirds, and Snakes at $98.5 million. I said going into the weekend that I thought that it could potentially get upwards of $100 million. So the fact that it came in underneath that shows it's not only underperforming domestically, but also internationally. That's where I think a lot of people thought the film might have actually had a chance to do a lot better, was in the international numbers. And right now it's just not showing to be as big of a split. And I just would not be surprised that this film, also similar to the Marvels, is just not able to really do a whole lot of anything. Remember, the Marvels opened to $110 million globally, so I think that having 2 movies in a row where you have, again, a lot of the marketing at the very least being very heavily focused about how there are the female leads, right? These are female-led stories. And with this one, right, with the Hunger Games, this is actually a usually a predominantly female demographic, right? It's a much higher female audience, right, percentage-wise for the Hunger Games films than there are for any of the MCU movies or general superhero movies. So the fact that this movie is doing about as well as the Marvels did, when you have those different audiences showing up, I think that says a little bit more also about modern day Hollywood system. Trolls band together $108 million worldwide. The Marvels only at $161 million after 2 weeks. Again, this film is done. It hasn't even crossed $100 million internationally yet. And as I said, I think that its chances of getting to $100 million domestically are pretty much non-existent. And it probably will even struggle to get to $200 million. Now, again, does it have a chance to? Right now, I'm thinking somewhere between $200 and $250 million as its end point. But could it end below $200 million? I think it's possible. Really, the only reason why I'm even giving that $200 to $250 million range is because we do have Thanksgiving coming up this weekend, and or rather this coming week. And because of that, when people are off from school, off from work, sometimes they will go see the movies in a much higher percentage or higher number than usual. But the fact that films like Wish that are about to come out from Disney are already looking to be box office flops because their projections are really, really low, and that's with an extended opening, right? I don't think that it really bodes well for a film like The Marvels. It could end up benefiting a film like The Hunger Games, for instance, where you have a lot of high schoolers off, right? You have a lot of college students that are off for that time. Maybe they would be interested in going to see it. But for films like The Marvels, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference at all. Thanksgiving, we can see right here, $12.6 million worldwide. Five Nights at Freddy's at $271 million worldwide. And just remember, that film, Five Nights at Freddy's, is going to easily have a higher box office than not only The Marvels, but also a good chance of having a higher box office by the end run, the end total of whatever is made by the actual Hunger Games films. Going into the charting, we love doing charting here over OMB Reviews. This is a chart that I've been using a few times in various videos and streams, and it's explaining a little bit about what the domestic ticket sales actually look like, right? So you have people over at Deadline, right? Like people like Tony who are trying to spin this as of being very successful and as actually being better than thought, right? It says right here, there is some great word of mouth for the movie among the under 25 crowd, which could benefit during the Thanksgiving stretch. However, this film was front-loaded a la any young adult movie aimed at women. That said, two types of movies work over Thanksgiving, family and PG-13 aimed at a fervent devo. Songs and Songbirds falls into the latter category. Yes, but that would require them to be a fervent demo for this specific franchise. And you can point to that when it comes to the original Hunger Games films, but this is the reason why I bring that up, because, again, he's talking about how there's this positive word of mouth. He loves bringing up the cinema score. He loves bringing up all these things, but it doesn't actually equate to ticket sales. And even if you do have some positive reviews coming out from these hardcore fans that actually, took the time to read the book, for instance, of which that book was by far the worst selling of the entire Hunger Games franchise by quite a bit, it's only about 3.3 million tickets. Compare that to the last film in the Hunger Games franchise with Jennifer Lawrence at 12.1 million tickets. Before that, 14.9 million tickets. And then before that, you had upwards of 19 million tickets being sold domestically in its opening weekend. It only have a $44 million take, even if you take adjustment for inflation out of it, which is already pretty bad. Again, we're talking, when you adjust the numbers, $200+ million being made by the first two movies, 150, 130 opening weekend for the next two movies, 44 million in comparison to those numbers adjusted. But it's even more so telling when you look at what's going on right now with the actual ticket sale estimates. Again, 3.3 million tickets versus 12, 14, 19. It's abysmal. It is absolutely abysmal. So for people like Tony and others in the media to try to argue that somehow, some way, this is a film that's just waiting for the audience to show up in some way, it just doesn't really seem based in reality when you compare this film historically to the other films in the actual franchise. Not to mention, for anyone that's going to try to argue that, again, I think that this weekend showed you that the actors being on strike had no real impact on the box office, because you had a week's worth of promotion and this film ended up making bottom of the barrel as far as what the projections going into the weekend actually were. You could argue it made less than what was being projected, but I think that has more to do with the fact that many of these projections have been based off of things like the actor strike ending, right? People in the media thought, oh, well, if it's ended and because there's those promotions, that means that it has to make more money. Well, I've been saying that's not really the case because people just don't care, right? People aren't just waiting with bated breath for an actor to come and give an interview, to be on a late night show, because people aren't watching those things anymore. You still have the older demographic that aren't seeing movies, watching the late night shows, so they don't really care all that much about what's being said. And then the younger people that it's being, geared towards don't watch that stuff anyway, for the most part. So we're looking at these numbers here, and people like me, I'm not surprised by this at all, but the people that are surprised or don't quite understand it, just do some basic math and some basic history and you'll better understand these things. Anyway, let's go ahead and go into the actual chart itself, because we love charts here at OMB Reviews. So whereas a film like Hunger Games, as I said, is in a bit of a better position, having only cost around $100 million, at least that's what's been reported according to various sources, including Deadline. And another big caveat, so I'll give Tony some credit here, he does explain a little bit more about why it is that Songbirds and Snakes is actually in a much better financial situation. It says right there that at $100 million production cost, 65% of which is funded by foreign sales, with another $20 million in German tax credits, Lionsgate's Francis Lawrence directed the movie, is structured completely different financially from a $200 million film like The Marvels. Lionsgate has largely covered their nut and exposure in foreign territory, licensing material and participating after their partners recovering the costs. Songbirds and Snakes will be profitable with a domestic end result between $120 and $130 million. Still, there didn't seem to be any kind of urgency here on behalf of fans. So it's interesting, again, because he's arguing something that is true, which is that because of the way that they financed that movie, the film is ultimately still going to be one where it probably has a good chance of making its money back, of even breaking even because of how it's being financed. But there's a couple things. One, this is only according to the reports of the budget, and we all know that Hollywood studios are notorious for underrepresenting their budgets or allowing their budgets to be underrepresented. But also another key factor here is that even if a film is profitable, does not mean that it's a success, or does not mean that the film is a huge box office hit, for instance, right? Because of the way they finance this movie, if you're saying, oh, it only needs to make 130 domestic to break even, you realize that you're arguing to say, well, even though this film is just catastrophic in comparison to the other films in the franchise, right? Again, we're talking night and day here, not even close to what the earlier films in the franchise actually made. If your only argument is, well, hey, at least it won't lose money. Look, I'm all about talking about films that are profitable, films that are not profitable, right? Films that are box office bombs, etc. But just because you could say technically your film made money, but on paper it is one of the lowest grossing films of the year and really does not justify its own existence by how much you spent, it's hard to say that you can really relaunch a franchise with these kinds of numbers, is essentially what I'm trying to say. But still, 1x its budget at this point in time. Very close to 1x its budget, I should say. So we'll have to wait and see. With the Marvels, some people have been really much looking forward to this and what's going to happen with it. Also, I guess before moving that, Hunger Games, remember that most films tend to make about a third of their entire worldwide box office in their first week. So if that holds, right, if this film makes a typical release, right now, both Hunger Games and Marvel seem to be indicating a much softer, a much lower release. The best case scenario for the film would be roughly $300 million internationally. And I just don't think that that's actually going to happen for the film. But that would be a kind of a best case scenario at this point for that film. It's a lot worse, though, when you talk about the Marvels. Only getting to $161 million. Right now, it's around $233 million in the red. And we can make some projections, right? So based off of this number, based off of typical historical standards, right? And remember, this film, week 1 to week 2, dropped 78+%. We'll find out the actuals on Monday when those numbers get released. The very latest Tuesday, Disney will probably drag their feet releasing the actual numbers there. But even with that being the case, right, a best case historical scenario for the movie would be to make $230 million internationally with a total or a best case scenario being $322 million. As I said, I'm right now thinking this film, with the way it's tracking, closer to that 80% margin. Oh boy. That means that the film has a much higher chance of only getting to $200 and $250 million best case scenario, and I think there's a good chance that it doesn't even get to $200 million. But these are the numbers, right, as we currently look at them historically. But just an important caveat just to mention there, that this is based off of a film for its first 2 weeks accounting for 70% of the box office. Based on how it's tracking, it's looking like that first 2 week, right? The first weekend, the first 2 weeks will probably end up accounting for closer to 80% of the entire box office. So we're talking here about best case scenario, and it's just not likely going to happen. So I think we can project this film is going to lose well north of $200 million when everything is said and done. And that's just based off of the budgets we have currently in front of us. There's a lot of speculation that this film cost a lot more than what's being let on. And I would say that there probably is a lot of truth to that. And again, this film looking to be a massive, massive financial flop. Finance at Freddy's is still doing very well, $133 million overall in net gain profit. And as you can see, this film is historically not doing all that well, right? Its first 2 weeks account for 80% of the entire box office. But because they spent so little money on it, they were able to make their money back and drive a lot of people to the Peacock service in addition to that. Killers of the Flower Moon is still a flop. I know that some people are trying to say, well, Scorsese doesn't care about the film making money, and, Apple TV doesn't care about the movie making money. And I'm just sorry, I'm going to call BS on that, all right? And the reason why is because if you're going to be spending a crap ton of money on a movie, you at the very least expect to make your money back. That's how any business works. That's how any person works. I know that people care. Sometimes you could argue people like Scorsese especially care more about the art than they do about anything else. But at the very least, you're still going to want to make your money back, right? Even an artist, right, a struggling artist is still struggling because they're not making at the very least enough money to, pay for their food or pay for these other things. So to try to argue that at a much broader, grander scale when it comes to, Hollywood executive and Hollywood director, that to be $200+ million in the red is not that big of a deal. I'm sorry, I got a bridge to sell you if you honestly believe that to be the case. Taylor Swift is pretty much leaving theaters at this point in time, but still well over $100+ million in net gain profits, 12.2 times its budget, at least the reported budget that we had several weeks ago when we originally did the initial coverage of that film. So that is, again, the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts about these movies? Have you seen any of them? Have you seen the Hunger Games film? I have not yet seen the movie myself, but what I can say is, objectively speaking, The film is a failure, all right? Even though the film, again, people like Tony are going to keep on bringing this up, could potentially make its money back, right? Potentially, if it gets to that $130 million domestic, which I don't think is outside of the realm of possibility. But with that being said, it just does not really seem like people are going out of their way to see movies like this anymore. And even again, we could argue that they have all these different financing options that have made it so that their break-even point's a lot smaller than the typical one. You're still looking at a movie that's going to be by far the lowest grossing of the entire franchise. And it still is a film that cost about as much as what the first film did. First film, right, cost around $107 million when you adjust for inflation. And if you compare that to the 19 million opening tickets domestically, oh boy, right, that film was able to essentially cover its cost in that opening weekend, right? Just talking there about production budget and not marketing. Hunger Games, I mean, there's an argument to be had about whether it'll actually on paper be able to cover any of those costs. I know you could argue again about all the different circumstances and all the different financing options, but individually, as an individual release, it is going to be a failure in comparison to how much money was actually spent on the film. So anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about that? What are your thoughts on the Marvels having a catastrophic drop-off? Again, biggest failure in MCU history. Couldn't happen to a nicer group. Couldn't happen to a nicer studio. Let me know your thoughts about that in the comment section down below as well. If you like this video, smash that like button. A lot of fun about asking, smash the rumble button as well. Make sure you share this out with your friends as well, because it does help out with the algorithm quite a bit. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel. Laura, the Mother Major General Story. Sorry, I didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK Man, who can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.